Today is day 264 of the podcast, and Matthew 16:13. We read where Jesus came into Caesarea Philippi and he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And this is the question we're going to look at a little bit today. The first reference to God in Genesis chapter 1 uses the Hebrew word Elohim for our translation is God. So in the traditional Jewish view, this is the name of God as creator and as judge. This is the initial way man came to know God. But upon the creation of man, another name is introduced in the scriptures, and we see that begin to show up in chapter 2 once man is formed. And it's this unpronounceable name that in scriptures is seen as YHWH, and the attempt to pronounce that, which they didn't do at the time because it was so holy, is Yahweh or Jehovah, comes from that name. It attempts to be the way of saying the unspeakable, but the way it's translated in Genesis then is Lord God. So as the history of mankind begins to unfold, we go from, in the first chapter, God said, God saw, God made, in chapter 1, 2, the Lord God formed, the Lord God commanded, the Lord God said, in chapter 2, and heading into chapter 3. So the only name we see once man was created in these verses was Lord God. And this is the way he made himself known to mankind, to his creation. He wanted to make himself known as Lord. So little wonder when Satan comes on the scene and he approaches Eve in the garden that he gets the name wrong. Watch how he approaches Eve. And he uses, "Did God say?" So we can certainly understand the evil one's reluctance to use the name Lord, but Lord God is the only name that Adam and Eve have been familiar with when it came to walking with their God. This name establishes submission, it establishes authority, and as they walked in that level of knowing and intimacy with the Lord, it was also a means of protection for them. As they identify him as Lord, he functions as their Lord, and they're protected. When Eve hears how Satan uses God's name, she repeats back a name that she has not had used before. She responds back to the name God and uses that name God instead of Lord God. And she has lessened at that point the relationship that God had established uniquely with her and Adam. Now, I want you to consider today's culture. How easy, even in an unbelieving, antagonistic culture to our God, the word God is still said, and we're able to use the word God. In fact, following 9/11, it was God Bless America showed up across the board, and we were able to freely speak, even with unbelievers, concerning God. But when you introduce the Lord God into the mix, it's harder to say that name because it absolutely defines who you are once you begin to use the name Lord God. Is it any wonder that this name has been challenged since the beginning of time? So today's question, is it possible to know Jesus as Lord and yet refuse to obey him?